Great. Good afternoon, everyone. And I would like to welcome you to What Counts in Primary Literacy. This is one of 4 series hosted by the Rural Education Advisory, UBC's Edith Lando Virtual Learning Center, the Greater Victoria School District, and the Ministry of Education. This is our 4th year in the middle year series, our 3rd year in the secondary series, our 2nd year in the numeracy series, and our 1st year in primary literacy. And we are just so delighted that you can join us today. It's a 2-part series, and this is the 2nd part. How fun. My name is Leyton Schnellert, and I am the Eleanor Rex Professor of Rural Teacher Education. And so this is part of my role, is to work with the Rural Education Advisory to identify areas that we want to work on and have conversations on and bring people together around the province. In our first series, we had wonderful colleagues sharing their practice and their work.
I'm extremely competitive in everything I do in my life.
And
I
we're
try to like
just
not
going
be so
to
competitive.
mute someone right now. I'm not quite sure who we're going to mute, but someone who's competitive.
That's awesome.
You'll do that. I can do it later.
Yeah.
We're just trying to
Hopefully,
mute.
I'm sure I'll remember. I'm pretty sure.
I don't care if you do. I'll do it because I checked it outside the building.
Jacqueline, are you
Thank
able
you.
to mute our friends? Great. Folks, I'm just going to invite you just now to check and make sure that you have muted yourselves so that your guest appearance in the video afterwards is minimal. But we're so glad that you're here, and we celebrate whatever you're sharing. I'll unmute myself now. Fantastic. I was saying some great things to myself. We are so glad that you're here and to be part of this conversation and this thinking together. And Harpreet, Esmail, and Charmaine, Shortt, and Faye, Brownlie were our speakers in the first session. And we're so glad that Faye has returned to do the opening piece today. And then we will hear from Briana Adams, and then we will hear from Harini Rajagopal. So we're just delighted to be here together for What Counts in Primary Literacy. I begin by acknowledging that I live and I research on the ancestral, traditional, unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan people, and I live as a settler guest in Syilx territory. I recognize that the Syilx Nation are to this day and every day the rightful caretakers of this territory, and it's therefore my obligation to acknowledge and to respect and to learn from Syilx knowledge and language and history, as well as their ongoing relationship to the land and the natural world. I recognize that the Syilx Okanagan have taken care of their homelands for thousands of years, and now that I call Syilx territory home, you know, I'm aspiring to be a better steward, to understand how to live in reciprocity from and with the land, with learners. And some of the most exciting things I've been able to do in my career in the last 10 years is in partnership with knowledge keepers and elders from the Penticton Indian Band, learning how place-based learning can be transformational for all kids, and how literacy is there, but also can be integrated in incredibly powerful ways that really transform how we think about teaching. So I invite you, should you be ready, have your fingers working and know where you are, to, if you'd like to acknowledge the territory of the place that you work and or live and or play, you're welcome to do that in any way to personalize it. And if you cannot do that at this time because you're driving home from work, thank you to all of our people from the eastern part of the province who are an hour later in their time zone. Of course, we understand that. I also am going to begin with this quote that I started with last time because the recording didn't quite start at the beginning last time. And so I'd like to begin with a quote from my dear friend, Richard Waganese, who passed away a few years ago. Richard wrote, "All that we are is story. From the moment we are born to the time we continue on our spirit journey, we are involved in the creation of the story of our time here. It is what we arrive with. It is all we leave behind. We are not the things that we accumulate. We are not the things we deem important. We are story, all of us. What comes to matter then is the creation of the best possible story we can while we're here. You, me, us, together. When we can do that and we take the time to share those stories with each other, we get bigger inside. We see each other. We recognize our kinship. We change the world one story at a time. Richard's work and Indigenous ways of knowing, local Indigenous ways of knowing in our various parts of British Columbia, help us to understand that children come with stories, children come whole, and we have a responsibility as educators to help recognize the funds of knowledge that they bring and grow them and help them build their capacity as literate learners. And I'm so glad that we're here together in this space to build a story together and to recognize that we come with different stories and how important it is that we bring our own knowledge and practice and experience together. Finally, just going to do a little connection back to what we talked about last time that didn't quite get recorded, which is, we're really in this place of learning from each other and the diverse speakers who are offering different aspects of literacy and ways of knowing. And we're so grateful that you're here today. And we welcome you to acknowledge and be present and be curious and to resist judgment or swapping stories or trying to make what someone's saying the thing that you're saying, but just to recognize that we all have something to offer in literacy practice. From the different bodies of research, the different practices, and in my case, the different generation that I might belong to in terms of experiences and knowledge and teaching that I have. But the highlight of my career, I have to say, is teaching kindergarten, where I lost all the kindergartens as I was singing a song on the electric keyboard, wondering, I'm like, come out to play, and I realized they were all stacked 5 deep underneath the electric keyboard, touching my legs and my shoes. And so we each come understanding and building our practice. And so we welcome you here with the experience that you have, the practice that you already have, deepening and extending that practice. Faye Brownlie, we're so delighted that you're here to kick us off in the second session. Faye, I've had the great fortune of working with you and knowing you for much of my career. And I'm so glad, Faye, that you have continued to lead us in the province to help us think about our practice, working with children in classrooms. I bet you were with kids today somewhere, and building and sharing the work that you do, not just with all of us, but across contexts. So I pass the baton to our colleague, Faye, and I will put myself on mute and we will switch the spotlight from me to Faye. And Faye, you're on mute right now, so that just gives us time to spotlight you. There you go. Still on mute. There you go.
Okay, I'm off mute. Yes, all right. Thank you, Leyton. And thank you for that lovely start with story, because I think every one of us who's here today is thinking of some of the stories that we have brought from our work with kids as we come into this practice. And so I invite you to think about the stories from your work with the kids that you're with today, as I try and make some links back to what we did last time and to set you up for a delightful following hour and a bit with Briana and Harini. I am not in the Silks territory, unceded lands with Leyton. I am here in my little corner, thankful to be living, working, and playing on the unceded and ancestral lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh peoples. As we start today, I want to bring us back to our big idea. We're thinking about what counts in primary literacy. We're thinking about practices and pedagogy that makes a difference, and we're thinking about it for all kids. And so on my little brief time, I'm going to try and link us to some of the things we talked about the last time when Charmaine and Harpreet were with us, and to sort of get you ready to launch into the conversations today. So we start with both the anchor and the target in thinking about our Ministry of Education's definition for literacy. We want this for all our kids from the beginning of time to be thinking about the ability and willingness to make meaning from text and to express oneself in a variety of modes and for a variety of purposes. This isn't something we save for the later years. This starts as soon as we welcome our kids into our buildings. And when we think about literacy, we think about all those big ideas around making connections, analyzing critically, comprehending, creating, communicating, and it is our end target. So when we're making decisions day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour in our classrooms with our kids, we're thinking about where we're headed and how we're doing along that road. So we think about the pedagogy, and like Leyton, I'm from a different generation than most of you, and perhaps a different generation from Leyton, pretty close too. But I think about all those years that I've spent in literacy education, and it, no matter what view of literacy, what pedagogy we're espousing, it comes back to intersecting circles in my mind. One piece is thinking about word recognition and word production, whether we're talking about reading or writing, speaking and listening. And the other intersecting circle is about creating meaning and communication. And they do not stand alone, they work in concert. And so we think about who's the audience for this pedagogy. Why are we caring? Well, our audience is both individual kids and our classes of our children. And so this is to whom we pay attention, the individuals and the group within the class. And what we're thinking about is the curriculum pieces, the pedagogical pieces, of how we put those component parts together. As I move around the province, I'm seeing countless districts working to create a personal framework for what is literacy. And there's frameworks out there already that people are working to say, how do we make one that's specific to us and to our kids in our context? But it always comes down in my mind to those two pieces: words and meaning, and the balance, not even balance, it's the intersection of these two. So we have a who, we have a what, and the how is the piece that keeps us excited and alive as teachers always. And it's our response to the individual kids and the group of kids' strengths and stretches. And that's the part that makes us professional teachers. That's the part that really counts. We need to know our kids, we need to know our curriculum, and then we make decisions about who they are and how we can best respond to them. And we always, always, always have our eyes on our kids, right? We can't do this without the kids in front of us, because what we do changes as a result of what the kids are doing. So now, that sounds kind of like motherhood and apple pie, but I just keep thinking, if we just keep remembering that as teachers, we are the most important people for leading and guiding instruction in those classes. And we can't do it without watching those kids and responding to them. So when I talk to teachers, when I'm working in classrooms, and I think about how our language has changed through my time in teaching, one of the most common words that we use again and again and again is diversity. And we talk about the diversity within our classes and how critical that is. And that diversity just reminds me how much we have to be working on our own thoughtfulness in helping nurture our learners, because there is such diversity. So I'm going to give you two little brief stories of two little girls with pseudonyms in grade 2 that I have come to know quite well. And I want you to think about that: who, the what, and the how we teach them. And again, it's those intersecting pieces. So Vinaya is in grade 2. She loves to socialize. She loves to read. She loves to share her thinking. She dances into the classroom. She loves to come to school. Life is a very, very exciting time for her. And she doesn't like to do some of the stuff that comes with the joy of literacy. So when she entered grade 2, she was not secure in the names of the letters of the alphabet, and she had very, very few letter sound correspondences, sound symbol correspondences. But boy, she could read any book. She could hold it the right side up. She could tell the story with animation. She could gather people around her to listen to her story. And she never needed to bother looking at the words. She never needed to bother looking at the letters. They weren't very familiar to her. The teachers in kindergarten and grade 1 they'd been, valiant in their efforts to try and do something to help her crack the code. What cracked the code for Vinaya was starting with the letters in her name and playing with those for several weeks until she really was expert on having, and she could say, I have more vowels in my name than anybody else in the classroom. I have 4. I can tell you them. Now, that's not what any program is going to tell you is where you start, but it's where Vinaya needed to start because it started with her. And we went from her name, fortunately, she had a large family, to the names of the people in her family, and that it only left a few letters out, and then we could start building from there. Right now, this is, Vinaya is one of the kids that I know quite well. You know kids like this too. And this is a piece I want you to keep thinking about because this is the pedagogy and the practice. What do you know about what kids need and how do you adapt it to the individual? Tanya is not quite as joyous about being in school. She does like playing a lot. She's very good at soccer. She really likes the other kids, but you have to work a little harder to get her stories out. And she is a most diligent reader. She has a very extensive background knowledge. And when she reads to you or to herself, it is just something that wrenches your heart out because she pays so much attention to the words that there's absolutely no meaning and there's absolutely no fluency. She was reading a book to me one day and it had a rabbit in it, and she called it a hare. And I said, a hare? She said, yes, it's a special kind of rabbit, Miss Brownlie, a special kind of rabbit. I said, oh, wow. I said, I didn't know that. She said, but I don't know why it's not here in the book. I said, well, what do you think that is? And she said, it. I said, what do you think it is? She said, it should be hare. And we had a whole little conversation, but she couldn't take, and she could do all the letters as she went through, but she couldn't blend them back in. She couldn't snap them back into being rabbit because she knew in her head it should be a hare. Right? I said, well, maybe you want to have a little look over here at the pictures. You can't do that, Miss Brownlie, it's cheating. Said, well, I'm looking at them and I'm thinking it might be in the desert. It probably is, and it's probably in Arizona. There's a lot of desert, and then off she goes in her piece. She needs totally different kind of instruction, right? She's quite good at sounding out, not so good at snapping back, but really good at sounding out and very accurate. Not so good at fluency, but very accurate. And she needs to be flowing and chunking and think about how the language sounds and all the language that she has, all the information, all the knowledge that she has in her head, so that she can use it to support that growing sound symbol that she's doing. Now, we can tell millions of stories about all the kids that we know, but here's the piece that I know you know. One size isn't going to fit those 2 little girls, and it's not going to fit the other 20 kids in the class side. But they do need sound symbol. They do need to be thinking about their background knowledge. They do need to be weaving and networking their thinking, and we need to be helping work with that orchestra. When we go. When we did, and some of you will remember this, changing results for young children, for young readers. Oh boy, I got a mistake there in my piece, don't tell Maureen. Changing results for young readers. At the end of the first year, when Sharon Jarosky was analyzing the data that had come in from every school district in the province but one, with teachers who had signed up to belong to this teacher researcher inquiry project to find a student that was at promise in their class that they really wanted to focus on, who looked at the work that they were doing and met 7 times over the course of the year to examine their practice and its impact on their students. The teachers reported at the end of the year that 4 things counted. These were the things, if we could get the kids to school, we could change the course of their literacy work. And here's what needed to happen. We had to have a relationship with them, right? We had to be focusing on meaning. They had to have choice, right? We couldn't make all the choices for them. Those students who were the most at promise often had the least amount of choice, and they needed choice. And they needed some time every day for a one-on-one conversation with a teacher to help take all that work, all that richness that was going on in the classroom, and make sure that they were making sense of it and putting those literacy tools to work. So think about those pieces. This is homegrown BC research, the power of the relationship. Remembering meaning counts. It doesn't mean those other pieces count. You have to have them all in there, but we can't exclude the meaning. We have to give them some choice, and we have to make sure that we're sitting side by side, eyeball to eyeball with them for some point in literacy conversations every single day. As you move forward in your conversations today with Briana and with Harini, and as you're thinking about the work you're doing with your kids tomorrow when they're back, and the conversations you have with your colleagues, do remember we've had a long history of professionalism and teachers making decisions based on what they learn when working with others in collaboration with others to make the greatest difference for the kids. And I invite you to continue on this exciting journey. Over to you, Leyton.
Thanks, Faye.
You're
so great to
welcome.
see you, and thanks for coming to rejoin us to launch this second session. We look forward to continued conversations
All
as
right.
we work together. We know that you're actually in the geographic center of the province right now and working with a group of teachers in SD 91. So we know you're heading over to that direction, but we
That's
just
right.
want to celebrate your contributions and look forward to a continued conversation.
Thank you. Have a great session.
Great. Folks, I'm going to invite Briana Adams to share now. Briana and I hadn't actually met until our planning meeting, but we've known of each other for quite some time. Briana is a teacher consultant in SD 38, Richmond, where I used to teach, and worked with my amazing sister-in-law in a dual track French immersion and English school, and has taught French immersion and English, as well as Briana contributed some examples to our Developing Self-Regulating Learners book with Deborah Butler, Nancy Perry, and I. So Briana, I felt like the time is now.
Right, it was bound to happen.
So I'm going to pass the torch to you, and we're just so glad that you're here to join us today.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the invite to share today. I'm so excited to share a little bit about a story from one of our classrooms in the Richmond School District, really thinking a little bit about how we can grow literacy through inquiry and some of those cross-curricular opportunities for literacy this afternoon. But I do need to start by saying that I respectfully acknowledge that I live and I learn, I teach and I play on the traditional and unceded territories of the Hunkaminam speaking language group. I acknowledge that I'm a settler on this land, and in my own acts of decolonization, I'm really working to learn what that means and to learn about the privilege that I carry in this world. I do work for the Richmond School District. As Leyton said, I taught kindergarten and K1 French immersion for most of my career. So I very much love primary land and primary world, especially early primary. But the last couple of years, I have been working on our district's curriculum team in all things literacy, kindergarten to grade 7, although I keep finding my way back into primary classrooms more often than not. I really need to give some attention to 4 to 7 more than I do probably, but I just love primary. So today I'm just going to share a story from our district. And like I said, I'm going to share a story from one of our classrooms because I think that's the best part of my job is that I get to bounce around from classroom to classroom. And I get to basically share stories around our districts and say, oh, hey, this is what I saw this teacher do. Do we want to try that together in your classroom? And that's what I'm going to bring today. But I do want to start by setting a little bit of the context of what's been happening in literacy in our district, because it's an important piece of the story that I'm going to share. And so as Faye mentioned, a lot of districts have been working on starting to think about frameworks for literacy, and Richmond is one of those districts. We're super, super lucky that we get to work with Faye on a regular basis. And so when she was thinking about her model and her framework that she shared earlier with the 2 circles coming together, that was something that she shared with us back last year as we were really starting to kind of navigate what a framework would look like in our district. And it basically was the perfect timing for us because we were a little bit stuck. We had all these ideas and all this thinking, and we weren't exactly sure how to bring it together in a way that was going to be accessible and meaningful for the teachers in our district. And so Faye's model gave us a little bit of a direction. And we have what is called the Pillars of Literacy, kindergarten to grade 2. It just went live in our district last June. And so this year we've been really living these pillars in classrooms. As you can see, we have 6 pillars of literacy. And what we've been sharing with teachers is that this is what we feel is important in literacy in our classrooms, and that all 6 pillars, from comprehension to concepts of text, phonological awareness, vocabulary background knowledge, phonics, and decoding in context, are all important parts of literacy programs in our early primary classrooms. And that is, we're helping students grow into readers and writers and thinkers and communicators, that we really need to be considering how we're nurturing and supporting the skills in all of the pillars. It does kind of read left to right. And that was one thing as we were talking about it was, we don't want teachers necessarily to say, I start with comprehension, tick, finish that, I move on to concepts of text, tick, finish that, then I move on to the next one, all the way down the line. We want all of these things happening all the time in our classrooms. But that being said, comprehension was put first on the far left for a reason, because as Faye shared, that ministry definition of literacy that we have in our province, it really all comes back to making meaning and being able to communicate meaning. And that's really at the heart of the literacy work that we're doing. And so, as I said, we've been starting to live these pillars in classrooms this year. And we say that it's a living document because as we're experiencing it in classrooms with teachers, we're playing with it and we're editing it and we're making changes. And so that's been my role this year, is getting to go out in classrooms and think alongside teachers, try things together and see how we can bring these pillars to life. And that's really what started the story from this kindergarten and grade 1 classroom that I'm going to share today. The teacher invited me in and asked if we could do some planning together. She knows that I'm sharing this story with all of you today, so it is shared with her permission. But she really wanted to try and explore a little bit about how to bring the pillars to life intentionally forward in the work that she was doing in literacy with her students. So to tell you a little bit about this amazing little K1 class that I get to spend every Tuesday morning in, it is probably the best part of my week, just from winter break until spring break. I'm committed to every Tuesday morning in this classroom. The teacher has created such a beautiful community and is doing such amazing things with her students. So it brings me so much joy to spend time in there. It is a kindergarten and grade 1 class that's about half Ks and half grade 1s. Many of the students are English language learners. So something that we talk about all the time is just that importance of building vocabulary, but also honoring their home languages and all of the gifts and the knowledge that they bring to the classroom, even though they may not be able to fully be able to communicate in English all of their thinking and ideas yet, and they're still learning that. They're super interested in stories. They love creating stories. They love listening to stories. They love their outdoor learning time and are very, very curious about all things nature and living things. They love building things, creating, and they are super keen on sharing all of their thinking and all of their ideas when they come together as a class. Something that I've noticed is that many of the students see themselves as readers and writers. Even the Ks who may not yet be able to read all the words on the page, they are able to see themselves as readers and see themselves as writers just by looking at the pictures and telling the stories. And that's an important part about what counts in literacy, is that students are developing identities as readers and writers. But that being said, being a kindergarten and grade 1 class, and probably similar to many of the classroom contexts that you all work in, is there is a large range of strengths and stretches. There's students coming in who are just beginning to learn their letters and sounds. And then there's some students in the class that are really beginning to read fluently and with a lot of confidence, and who are able to really start writing and sharing their ideas in writing. As I first started in this class back in the beginning of January, the teacher and I were starting to talk a little bit about what we would try together and do some planning together. And she shared something that had happened in I think the first week back after the break. They'd actually one day during kind of music class, I think they had played a Charlotte Diamond song about otters. I think a couple of the students made connections to trips to the aquarium over the winter break. And they started talking a little bit about sea otters. During their center time, their playtime in the afternoon, a few students started to build this little sea otter habitat at their small world center, and a few other students started to get interested in it. So the teacher put up on one of the, just the edge of a cabinet, I think, in the classroom where it was reachable for the students, sea otter wonder papers, and students started writing some wonders that they had about sea otters. And this really started to emerge as something that the students were interested in. One day, I believe she said, a student said to her, can we kind of grow this story that they had? And they wanted to make this whole big mural in the background. And so being responsive to students and also honoring our early learning framework that we have in this province, where we look at being emergent and responsive to the interests and passions of our students. And we think about that a lot when we think about what counts in literacy too. She decided to head down this path of this otter inquiry and constructing this habitat and this mural together. And so in my time there, every Tuesday morning in our collaboration block, we wanted to start to think a little bit about what that could mean for literacy and how we could kind of follow the lead of the students and how we could be responsive to their interests, but tie in those pillars of literacy. I should say that during that collaboration block on Tuesday mornings, it's myself and the classroom teacher, and there is an educational assistant in the classroom during that time supporting a student, but also kind of supporting all of the students in the class. So there was a lot of collaboration between the three of us. And then the resource teacher also has been joining us for our kind of debrief meetings so that she can kind of continue to carry forward and support some of that work at other times during the week when she's in the classroom as well. So our professional inquiry question as a team of educators working together in this classroom was, how can we foster the skills and the strategies in our pillars of literacy for all learners through this sea otter inquiry? So how could we really work on nurturing students as readers and writers and thinkers and communicators, and specifically tie in some of those skills in the pillars of literacy? One of the first things that we did was we sat down as a team and thought about, okay, if we're thinking about that definition of literacy, that we are making meaning from a variety of texts and then communicating our meaning and communicating ideas in a variety of ways, what were going to be some of the literacy pieces that we could really work on through this interest in creating this habitat, this mural, and in this otter inquiry that the students wanted to go to learn about. So we kind of split it into two pieces. The first piece was reading for information about otters to help develop the mural. So we knew that the students were really curious and learning more about otters, and that they were going to need to learn more things in order to help them figure out the pieces that they wanted to add and contribute to and to build their mural. So when we thought about that reading for information piece, we thought, okay, let's now go to our pillars of literacy. Let's go back to our framework. Let's think specifically about the students in our classroom and their strengths and their stretches. And let's think about what we're noticing and what then could be a couple of skills that we could work on as we're reading for information to help students continue to grow in their literacy skills. So a couple of the things that we picked for the comprehension pillar, we thought, okay, we're going to really be working on making meaning from pictures, really noticing things, making some inferences, making some connections, really growing our meaning by looking closely at pictures. We also knew that we were going to be working with a lot of nonfiction texts, that students were going to be listening to nonfiction texts be read aloud, and that they were also probably going to have opportunities to do their own reading of nonfiction texts. And so we wanted to practice what that meant to retell information from nonfiction texts. How can we gather information from those texts in order to use it to grow the mural? And we were going to continue to go down the path of practicing asking questions, because that was something the students had already started doing in that Otter Wonders section of the classroom that they had. We knew that there would be a lot of vocabulary building, that blue pillar that would have to happen. There would probably be a lot of language and vocabulary that would be new for students. And we knew that we could probably have some opportunities to do some decoding work, especially with our grade ones, and practicing different ways to decode and to practice reading, especially some of the challenging words that they were going to see in some of those nonfiction texts. The other big piece that we wanted to work on in terms of literacy through this inquiry was writing. We thought that the students were probably going to be interested in and help to grow their mural by writing facts and writing labels for their mural. And so when we thought about the pillars of literacy in terms of those pieces, we knew that we were going to work a lot on communicating ideas and different ways that students could communicate their ideas to contribute to the mural. We definitely knew there would be some phonemic awareness stuff happening. So especially identifying beginning and ending sounds for our Ks, segmenting, really breaking apart the sounds and words in order to be able to write them. Concepts of text, the couple of things that we had been noticing about the students were that some work on spaces between words was going to be important, as well as starting to introduce some ideas about punctuation and capital letters when we're writing sentences, especially for our grade ones. And then, of course, there would be some phonics tied in as students were writing. They would have to be thinking about letter sound correspondence. And particularly some of the things we'd noticed with the Ks and the ones was they were really good at hearing consonant sounds when they were writing. And so supporting them to begin to hear some of those vowel sounds into words and add those as well. So that seems like a lot, and it seemed a little daunting, but we knew that through a variety of different learning experiences, we could offer some explicit instruction and lots of time for students to have practice with these different pieces, all in a way that was contextualized and was going to help them grow their mural. So it was meaningful to what they were wanting to learn and work on. So here's our plan. This is what we came up with. We knew we had a number of Tuesday mornings together, plus a variety of other times that the classroom teacher and resource teacher were going to collaborate together throughout the week. We kind of split it into 3 sections. We were going to do some whole class learning experiences. And when we think about what counts in literacy, we knew that we needed those whole class learning experiences to have some differentiation so that students were going to be able to all find ways to be included and to have access in those learning experiences. We knew that we wanted to have a gradual release of responsibility, so opportunities for some explicit instruction to happen. We also knew that we wanted opportunities for teacher modeling to take place. So us as teachers modeling our thinking, modeling what it looks like to retell information from a text, or modeling what it looks like to listen to the sounds in a word in order to be able to segment it, to write it down. And we really wanted to continue to build community through this shared learning experience. We thought, okay, so then if we're thinking about this gradual release of responsibility, we're going to do some whole class pieces. We're probably going to want to do some small group work, especially using the fact that there's more than one adult in the room, which we know is not always the case and not always super easy. We thought specifically, we know that what's super important in literacy is that there's time for students to read one-on-one with teachers, and for teachers also to sit beside them one-on-one when they're writing, or in small groups to be giving them that feedback. So we wanted to use that small group time for those reading and writing conferences, as well as use that small group time for some more explicit instruction and supported practice around some of those skills that were going to be just right for those learners at that time. And then as we were doing small group learning, we knew that we wanted to have the rest of the students be engaging in literacy centers because we knew that literacy centers could be highly engaging. Also an opportunity for choice for students to engage in a variety of literacy activities that they wanted to engage in and have some choice in the text they were going to look at and the types of writing they were going to do. We knew that we wanted those literacy centers to be open-ended, to provide lots of differentiation for all students in the classroom, and that the teacher who was not working in small groups was going to be circulating and working and providing feedback and having reading and writing conferences with the students in literacy centers. So that was our plan. And I'll show the next few slides kind of what that looked like and some examples from the classroom. So here are some examples of just a few of the whole class learning experiences. Some of them were ones that when I was there, some of them were ones that the classroom teacher did on her own with the class. One of the first things we did was we went back to that Charlotte Diamond song that kind of sparked the whole interest in sea otters. And we looked at the song together over many, many days. So some of the things that we did was we just talked about what did we find out about otters by listening to this song. The word urchin came up and students didn't know what sea urchins were. That was new vocabulary and new learning. So we did a little bit of a look online about images of sea urchins and finding out about that. We actually practiced looking at that word urchin then and talking about some of the sounds that we recognized in that word to help us figure out how we could read it because it was a pretty tricky word. We also did lots of wonders about what does that mean? Why does it talk about them on their back? And curious about what that means for otters, how they float on their back a lot. Students came up and were invited to find letters or to find words that they knew. And so every student was able to come up and show a letter that they knew or a word that they knew. We noticed that there were some rhyming words in the song. And so we were playing with some of those phonological awareness pieces, the phonics pieces as well. And this was over multiple days. One day there was a student in a class who has a name that ends in SEA, in C. And so she noticed that there were some EA sounds, just like her name in the song. And so we did a little bit of talk about that long E sound. And yes, it's probably jumping ahead of where the students were at in terms of their phonics knowledge, but that's okay because it was being responsive to what was currently of interest to that student and to that group of students at that time. They noticed then that EE also makes the same sound. And so we talked about some vowel teams one day and off they went. And for some of the students, they didn't really fully understand that, and that's okay. And other students were then noticing it in the books that they were reading. We did a lot of explode the images where students were sharing their thinking, what they were noticing in the images, what we could learn from the images. We also practiced kind of labeling the images. So students would come up and label things, and some students would write, just as you can see, the H for head, and other students would write the whole word and segment it. And sometimes as teachers, we would write words and model how to segment words. So we practiced some of those pieces. We practiced doing some interactive writing as well. You can see that on the right. So looking at an image and thinking about what we could learn from that image, what we're noticing, and then how we could write a sentence or write some words to tell about it. And for that one, we really worked on sharing the pen. And so students were invited to come up and maybe write the first letter of the word. And then as the teacher, I would fill in the rest of the word, or they would write a part of the word that they knew. And then another student would come up and write the rest of the word. So we were really working together. And then of course, we did a lot of read alouds and talking about our learning as well. Some of the small group learning experiences that we did, and this was working with a teacher during literacy centers. And so students would kind of be just called over to one table in the classroom for 5-10 minutes to do a little bit of small group work together. One of the things when we are thinking about needing students or wanting students to be able to label or do some writing, we were noticing that the small groups that they would need to do a little bit of work around phonemic awareness and letter identification to support that learning. And so they did some things like playing bingo. They did some things with the alphabet tubs. We put alphabet tubs in every early primary classroom in our district this year. And that image in the middle. And so what you can see is that they're filled with toys that all start with the same sound. You can also resort them into ending sounds. And so the kids love touching the toys and they love playing with them and building tons of vocabulary, but it was just an opportunity to practice those beginning sounds, those ending sounds. We did some which one doesn't belong activities around beginning and ending sounds. We used Play-Doh and made letters. So just a little bit of work every day, 5 minutes, just practicing some of those things that were going to support the students when they were doing some of their other thinking and writing and creating for their mural about otters. So after they did a little bit of that practice, another day some of the students were invited to come together and to work in a small group with a teacher to practice writing some labels. And so you can see in some of the pictures, some of the labels they created, and many of these were kindergarten students that were working on these labels. And so they're beginning to listen to the sounds, to write them down, thinking about how to form their letters. This one student said, I heard in at the end of mountain, and I know how to write in. It was a word family that they had been talking about in the classroom previously. And so she heard that sound and wrote it down and was so proud of herself. So this was supported by a teacher in a small group so that we could really work one-on-one with helping the students think about, okay, what is in the mural? What are some important words that we know that we've learned about sea otters in our reading that we want to now add to the mural up there? One of the things that we noticed as teachers is that, and I think I mentioned this earlier, a lot of our writing, the students are not yet including vowel sounds. They've got beginning sounds and ending sounds, which is fantastic. And so moving forward, one of the things that we are hoping to work on with some of the students now is how could we hear some of those vowel sounds to include them when we're stretching out our words. Some of the other students who were a little bit more comfortable with reading, some of the grade 1s in particular, we did some small group reading with them. And so they came together in small group and they were reading texts about sea otters. Sometimes it was a common shared text that a few students were all reading, but they all had their own copy of it. And what we did was we did a little bit of vocabulary building to start, talking about what we were going to maybe see in the pages that they were going to read, and then invited students to read individually by themselves quietly as the teacher went around and had reading conferences with the students and was able to support them in some of the decoding pieces, to ask some questions about comprehension, and to engage in little quick conversations, just 1 to 2 minutes for students. Again, when we think about what counts in literacy, being able to spend time reading one-on-one with students and supporting them one-on-one with writing, we know is important, although it's super hard sometimes to find the time to do that or to feel like we have the time to do that in our classrooms. And so using these small group opportunities to provide us with time to give that one-on-one attention to our students, even if it was listening to them read one sentence or one page, was important. We came back together then after they had a chance to read, and as a teacher, I'd listen to all of them read, and we talked about what did they learn from those pages. We'd shared what strategies they used when they got to really tricky or hard words, and we talked a little bit about some of our decoding strategies that we can use. And then students were invited to write a sentence to share what they had learned. Again, we were practicing stretching out sounds. We were practicing leaving spaces between between the words. We talked a little bit about capitals and periods with some of the students, and they were able to then add their facts to the mural. They also shared their facts with the class first when we came back together at the end of Lit Centers, and then they were able to add. So the mural started to grow with labels and facts. They were adding pieces to the mural during center time based on all this reading that they'd been doing. As the students were kind of working in small groups, the rest of the students were doing literacy centers, and we had a whole variety of literacy centers that we did over the weeks. And I only have a couple slides that I'm going to share with you today. We could go on for a long time sharing some of the different things we did. One of them we had was just playing with letters and words. The students had brainstormed a bunch of words that were important to them in this sea otter inquiry that they wanted to learn how to write with their teacher. And then we put out magnet letters, we put out whiteboards, we put out markers, and students were able to then practice writing those words or building those words with the magnet letters, thinking about what letters they needed in order to write those words. This one student in the middle actually drew a sea otter and then was using the words to practice labeling, kind of like we had done in our Explode the Image that day, where we had labeled a picture together as a class. Urchin was not a word that was on their list. And so you can see the child was trying to sound out that word and to write it by themselves to show that the sea otter was holding an urchin. Different students in the class were all able to engage in this in a way that was of interest to them. And they were making words that were currently meaningful to them and were contextualized for the inquiry that they were doing. We also had, and I think this was the most popular one, they loved doing this one. We had an otter fact book center. So we put out a whole bunch of nonfiction books about otters, as well as a bunch of mini books. And if you work in early primary, you know that mini books are a way that you can hook many children in. They love creating their own little books. And so students were writing their own fact books. And then the teacher who was circulating during Lit Centers was able to have some of those writing conferences with students. And so you can see the one at the top says, did you know that otters close their nostrils when they dive in the water? And something the classroom teacher and I had talked about was whoever was having those conferences, that we were going to pick one thing to talk to the student about and to help them with their writing, whether it was something about growing their ideas, whether it was something about a phonics or a spelling piece, whether it was something about a concept of text, that at any one moment, we're going to kind of work with students on one thing, depending on that individual student's strengths and stretches as a writer. And so for this student, this was a student who was super, super reluctant to write at the beginning of the year. And now you can see how much she's taking risks with her writing. And this really emerged during this inquiry because she was so passionate and so excited about the sea otter inquiry. So what we talked to her about was capital letter at the beginning of her sentence, and that she was asking a question. And so what punctuation needed to go at the end of her question. This little one with the whiteboard was a student who doesn't love writing, but he was super excited to draw a sea otter, and orally was able to tell us all of these things that he had included in his drawing based on his learning from all of the read alouds and the work that they had done during whole class experiences. So you could see how much meaning he was making, even though he was reluctant to write, but look at all the details he included in that drawing. And the last one we had always had open was just reading other nonfiction books. And we called it Reading Like a Scientist because we knew not all students are going to be super passionate about otters, and they might want to read and learn about other animals. And so this was a Reading Like a Scientist. And again, the teachers were able to bounce around and have reading and writing conferences. And that whole time, as we were engaging in all of those different literacy learning experiences, when we go back to what counts in literacy, it was all contextualized, and it was all the students understood how being readers and writers was helping them grow this mural that they were super excited and passionate about. And so you can see how the mural grew over time. There was a little kelp forest because they learned about that in some of the reading that they'd done. They added sea urchins after they learned that word, and we'd studied what that meant. Their labels and their facts were growing all the time. And so students were really beginning to see themselves as readers and writers, contributing to this whole class learning experience together in a way that was super exciting for them. And they were so excited. Different teachers have come in, different students have come in, and they're so excited to share what they've learned about sea otters and to share what they've done as readers and writers. So I think that brings me pretty close to the end of my time. And I know I was asked to include a reflection question. And Faye started us off so nicely at the beginning of the day today with talking a little bit about what counts in literacy. And so the reflection question that I thought I would ask for you to think about, and if you feel like it, invite you to put in your thoughts in the chat, are just about in thinking about what counts in primary literacy. How was that reflected in the examples that were shared in that sea otter inquiry? And so on that note, thank you so much for the opportunity to share this story. I told the students that I was sharing their story with a bunch of teachers today, and they were super excited and proud. So I'll definitely have to let them know how it went. But thanks so much.
Huge thanks, Briana. You worked in so many different angles of the literacy happening in the classroom and helped us see how literacy happens in the content areas and how we can nurture it in really powerful ways. Folks, if you get your fingers all warmed up, you can share something in the chat box around something that you saw in that example in terms of what counts as primary literacy, and maybe even what surprised you or like reminded you, oh, of course. I love the spelling of urchin with the capital R. That reminds me of some pretty happy times in primary classrooms. Thanks, Briana, for sharing. As we shift the spotlight from Briana to Harini, I just see things about to happen in the chat box. I can feel it happening anytime. Look at people just getting their fingers warmed up and typing in the chat box. Yes, I feel it coming. I'm manifesting it from your fingers, people. Thanks, Grace and Rod. Thanks, Aisha. What do I say in the classroom? I like the way you're typing, everyone. I don't usually say typing to kids. I'm really thrilled to introduce my colleague, Dr. Harini Rajagopal. Harini and I have had the great privilege to work together at UBC. We share cohorts together. We've co-taught together. We've cried together. We are and continue to be in the trenches, teaching and learning and researching with teachers, with children. Harini, just the spirit and the commitment you bring to our diverse learners and the funds of knowledge and identity that they bring continue to inspire me. And I am so thrilled to have you as a colleague at UBC, as well as working in Surrey School District in your researcher role. Harini, I invite you to share your work now, and everyone is sending you all kinds of happy icons right now. I can feel while they're trying to type in the chat box at the same time. Harini, over to you, friend. I pass the torch to you.
Thank you. Thank you. always ready for happy icons. Vanakkam, namaste. Beautiful to be here with you this afternoon. I'm so grateful to all of you for being here. And so grateful for this chat. And Briana, that inquiry was beautiful. And yes, exactly. Those of us in the primary years are like, oh, I love those drawings and that writing. And so thank you for sharing that. And also for the commitment to this work. I am coming from this decolonizing, equity-oriented space of today, wanting to talk about what counts in primary literacies by talking about the powerful and joyful space of multiliteracies. And I want to quickly share that this image here is a photo that I took in India, sharing with permission, created by my amma, who's my mom, and my kids. And this is an invitation that's often created at doorways or portals. It's called by different names. In my language, Tamil, it's called kolam. It's often called rangolis. And this is a way to gracefully and gently invite animals, creatures, people into a space. And I'm doing that today with all of you. But before I begin, if my screen would change, yes, it does. I want to acknowledge with so much gratitude that I am joining you today from my home on traditional, ancestral, unceded territories of the Hankaminam speaking Musqueam. I live here with my 2 children, my partner, and I'm daily thankful for the privilege of being able to do that. I live minutes from the reconciliation pole, so my daughter and we walk to school every day. And so there's this reading of the poll that's happened from when she was wee, and she's 8 now. And so that continual sort of recognition of what that means. She created this and took this photo of this this decal that you see here. And she created this when she was 5, when we were at a memorial honoring the thousands of children who were stolen from their families. And as we know, Indigenous communities have known this for a long time, but I think I put this in here, of course, to continue to honor them, but also to recognize the powerful ways in which children can work with and recognize and represent complex stories through a range of communicative repertoires. And that's at the heart of what I'm going to be talking today, which is, and a lot of the first part of what I'm going to be talking about is just a refresher for most of you, but also I want to contextualize multiliteracies within this space. And so to think about communicative repertoires as dimensions of literacy, and so to think about the expressive dimensions, which is speaking, writing, representing, and the receptive dimensions. And if we are thinking of these, then they're positioned within a focus of meaning making, which is foundational within the context of the BC curriculum, especially within the early learning framework, where we're thinking of living inquiries, especially within a holistic understanding of meaning making in the first few principles of learning. Also, I want to think about these dimensions of literacies as threading and building off of each other in reciprocal and symbiotic ways. Because when we're thinking, as we all know, right, when we're thinking, and as Briana just said, when we're thinking of drawing, that builds into writing. Writing floats on a sea of talk often, or how reading can lead to different ways of listening. And so how each of these dimensions build off each other in very productive ways. And at the heart of it, they're all contextually situated within the interests and the skills and the resources that children bring with them. Ta-da, that's where multiliteracies comes in. And look at that beautiful garden. And those 4 people are the same person just walking around the garden. And the beautiful labeling. And so I was like, yay, Briana, labeling. But thinking about multiliteracies, which is at the foundation is coming from a socially just space, from an equity-oriented space, from a space of highlighting identities, but with 2 specific aspects that I would like to quickly point us to. And I'm going to, in the next 2 slides, talk a little bit deeper about those. But the first being multiple ways of representing, foundationally multimodalities, and cultural and linguistic diversity within the scope of meaning making. All of these except this one, but all of the photos are shared with permission from the children. And I like to think of them as the voices of children within this presentation, because we are always speaking alongside and being with our learners. And so when we're thinking of multimodality, we're thinking of language as just one of a range of different modalities, and recognizing that as I'm gesturing, that gesture is a way of meaning making, that speech is a way of meaning making, that images are a way of meaning making, as is reading and writing. And so how we see these practices embodied in our classroom, as we know, is drawing, singing, dancing, playing, photography, making stories, being outdoors in the forest, and of course, reading and writing. And so all of these bring with them affordances for different times, for different purposes, and different skills that we can work with and teach. The second aspect of multiliteracies builds from a space of cultural and linguistic diversity, and recognizing that cultural uniqueness and shared humanity are at the foundation of the space. And so to recognize languages and cultures as resources for meaning making and for learning within classrooms. And so to think about these in a sense, rather than from a deficit space as often impeding English language learning, and instead to reframe these from strengths-based perspectives to think about ways in which language or cultural ways of meaning making, for instance. How do I think of family? Do I think of family in as a smaller group? Do I think of family as a group of people who might be situated in different places? Or how do I think of reading at home? And then going back to those dimensions of literacies and thinking, so do I need to read at home? How are these literacies building off each other in different ways? And so to recognize that multiple languages can make their way into our classrooms. And again, without all of us needing to know as teachers, all of those languages, definitely making way instead for sharing space with children, sharing expertise with families, sharing space with knowledge keepers, elders, and coming to classrooms, to our practices with reflection and curiosity, right? Bringing ourselves as learners within classroom spaces. And those become creative and flexible practices that permit us to bring our whole identities and kids to bring their whole identities. I'm going to talk about these pieces of writing in Hindi and German, and there's writing in Mandarin, and I see some writing in part Spanish and part English, some French languaging. And so, but recognizing that our wholeness of our identities contribute to the ways in which we make meaning. And as we all know, foundationally, who children imagine themselves to be and who they imagine themselves as being, as they could be, are so interlinked with learning. And so when we are working with responsive ways of meaning making, putting our relationships with children, whether in these large inquiries and then small group conversations and then one-on-one ways of building skills, specific instruction, when we're working with the heart and we're working with a focus on relationships, it offers us so much capacity towards being able to think of another way, another lens of meaning making. So what that was a quick primer so that I can share with you these joyous little examples from classrooms, some from grade 1, some from grade 2, 3, and share with you some stories towards recognizing multiliteracies as another beautiful, joyful, productive lens to thinking about how we can support learners across our classroom, supporting all learners in equitable ways, and think about these as powerful practices that we can all take up. So I'm going to offer two sets of inquiries, both of which in this case are coming from the visual modality. We all have instances, I'm sure, from playful modalities, from modalities of drama, from modalities of singing. And today I've chosen two that are from the visual. So I'm going to share first the context for looking closely, which was when a friend of mine who is a researcher who works with indigenous native species of plants across the world visited my classroom and shared with my kids her close-up drawings. So she shared photos of trees and she shared photos of plants, and the kids were fascinated. And they asked her questions like, so was your nose on the ground when you did that? And did you have to lie flat to be able to look so closely? How long did it take you to draw the lines on that tree? And so from there sprung our inquiry, which was called Looking Closely by the children. And it came from that space of wanting to look closely and also wanting to make meaning for themselves. So what we did was we went out into the yard. So this teacher and I who collaborated in this classroom went out into the yard, and children chose whatever they wanted to draw to look closely at. And our intention was to slow down, was to look closely, was to draw, redraw, and write and read. And so what we did was this whole group inquiry. And then we got into smaller groups and had collaborative conversations about the drawings. And then we had individual discussions about pieces of writing, pieces of reading, and ways of making meaning through literacy that were instructional. Right. So there was this huge choice, and then a more structured conversation, and then individual instruction. This image is from Anne, who is a fantastic soccer player, an amazing teammate, a child who can speak 3 languages, and who would take his mom to the bank and translate into English for her. He would talk on the phone with bank people, and he was 7.5. He was a rock star. He is a rock star. And he was categorized as an English language learner. He was many years behind in his skills. And what this project offered him was a capacity to be able to shine with his artistic skills, because what he was an artist who would draw these complex ninja drawings from YouTube. He would draw very specific ways of his YouTube stars. So when we went out, he picked in the yard for this Looking Closely project, he picked a leaf. And over the course of our drawing time, which was a week, the leaf dried and shriveled and changed shape and became crazy. And he kept, as you can see, he kept changing the drawing. And so when it came time to sit in his small group and talk about it, he was like, I've drawn this so many times. What do I say? It's just a leaf, he said, shrugging. And so I suggested, and maybe we could look closely. And he looked closely and he said, okay, I see a horse and a dragon talking. And they are figuring out how to become friends. And there's a bird that's being noisy and poking holes in the leaf. And then he went ahead and wrote this little piece for a child who would write one sentence with much reluctance. This was written with joy, with speed. And then we spoke about the fr and the dr in front and dragon. And offered specifics around, do I write horse and do I write front? And we spoke afterwards about punctuation, and it gave us all of this time when we looked closely, we looked carefully, and he created from this drawing a beautiful visual artistic story, but also for himself, a new space within the classroom. The next story I'm going to share is a multilingual story, and it's coming from the second project that I spoke about, so the children were, this is another class, and the kids were super interested in bringing in things from their home that they loved. And so some wanted to bring toys, some wanted to bring iPads and everything else. And they wanted to bring photos of their mom and their pets and their siblings. And they wanted to work with photography. They wanted to work with drawing. And we, the teacher and I, wanted to bring their home languages into the classroom space. And so what we invited them to do was they created this project called Something or Someone I Love. This was over 3 months. We themed around in a similar structure. We had these large group discussions. Then we sat around in small groups where they would look at their photos. This is not a photo. This is somebody who couldn't take a photo, so she did a drawing of things they loved. And what this offered again for those kids is a new way to think about their capacities, but it also offered them, as we know, ways to make meaning of them, of their identities, make meaning of their toys. In this case, this child wrote about 2 different aspects. In her English narrative, she's written about how cute the toy is, how squishy it is, what it looks like, what its name is. And this is oriented towards her friends in the class. And then the one in Hindi is about her mom who gave it to her, how much she loves her, how she gave it to her for her birthday. And so the audience, the intention of the 2 pieces is completely different. And that's foundational to in our understandings of literacy, of thinking about audience, of thinking about purpose, of thinking about ways of meaning making. And I share these because, again, this was a child who was thought of as needing a fair amount of work in class, of often feeling disengaged. And I think, again, working from that heart space gave her a new way of being within the classroom and helps us understand literacies in new ways, in those multidimensional ways. This again is from the same project. I'm not going to read both of these, but I'm offering this here just as a way to say that, you know, this is Jay, and he wrote about his pet, and he didn't want to actually write in Spanish, but his mom wanted to, and so he asked his mom to write it, and he wrote the English translation. And so in that way, Spanish made its way into this class. And I offer these as ways in which we can think about the multiple ways in which we can listen for new stories, the multiple ways in which we can value communicative repertoires, the multiple ways in which we can expand our understandings of literacies through recognizing modes, through recognizing perspectives and voices, and fundamentally to recognize children's contexts, whether it's in these large groups, whether it's in smaller instructional specific practices. And like Briana said, there were all of these ways in which we were working one-on-one with these children, but also offering them this large choice space to engage with their being and belonging. And finally, to think about culturally sustaining pedagogies as ways of powerful meaning making within a multiliterate space, and to think about the ways in which we can share expertise within the classroom, and to think about ways in which we can build capacity as teachers across the board, whether it's with families, whether it's with children, whether it's with our collaborative teachers, whether it's with ourselves and being reflective practitioners, and to move to making inclusive spaces of belonging for all learners within our mainstream classroom space. With that, what I would like to do is to have some good times for us to think about, what do these ideas of multiliteracies have to do with primary literacy? And how does the consideration of multiliteracies help us move forward in our practices as teachers?
Thanks, Harini. I feel you've warmed us up. Warmed us up to like finish off with some good reflection. So people in the house, in the chat box, Harini, would that be a good place to do this?
Yes, please.
Excellent. Feel free to offer something around, what you're taking away from this in terms of primary literacy, or how thinking about this multi-literacies idea might help you move forward in your practice. I'm going to try and type in the chat box as best as I can, but it reminds me of Katie Wood Ray's book About the Authors, which is about writing workshop with the youngest kids in the mini books, and how doing work in the Northwest Territories, these grade 1-2 classrooms I worked in, teachers created a bookcase in their rooms that was only for children written books. And so they made lots of mini books, but they chose their best one and illustrated it, and then they stuck it in the bookshelf, and then during quiet reading time they could read each other's books. Like that was kind of a way to honor each other. So I should have typed that and not said it, so here I go typing now. But here comes some reflections in the chat box. I see Grace and Rod there.
And again, even our having this conversation on chat and in person is a multiliterate practice. When we're moving away from the focus on specifically print, when we're moving away from a focus specifically on English, we're working on decolonizing, we're working on bringing in culturally sustaining practices that are doable in small and big ways.
Harini, I think that might be a new term for people, culturally responsive or culturally sustaining pedagogies. Do you want to talk about that a tiny bit? What people are typing?
Sure, absolutely. So when we're thinking about culturally sustaining, culturally responsive, culturally reflective, and then those types of practices, what we are working with is recognizing first that there's a diversity of cultures and that each has a space within our classroom, and moving away from normative classroom practices, which we've all been used to all of these years, and trying to think about how we can make inviting spaces for families, we can create welcoming spaces for multiple languages, we can create decolonizing spaces for critical linguistic awareness, so move away from deconstructing basically our own practices towards working with practices that sustain communities in ways that make meaning for them.
Yeah. It really feels like we're recognizing kids. We're making space for kids to be recognized, and they're bringing in their knowledge, like they're bringing in their language. Or in the case of the kid who was translating for his mom, there was like moving back and forth between like home language, school language, in ways that crossed, it wasn't just English and it wasn't just Spanish, it was both together.
Yeah, exactly. Or for all of those children, they were doing amazing multilingual work. And for us, we were unlearning, relearning ways of being in the classroom, but also being language inquirers, and taking space on the side so that children can take space in the center.
Brilliant. Thanks, folks, for typing into the chat box. And thank you to both Briana and Harini for reminding us that drawing and writing are interconnected, and that's part of language development, and that's part of literacy. And anybody who has recently, well, now I'm of the age of grandchildren, but anybody who either remembers themselves as a child or your own kids or your grandkids writing on the walls with invented spelling, you know, it expands the classroom and the home, which is kids want to communicate.
Mhm.
Harini, I see a final slide from you there.
Ooh, yes, I'm just saying thank you, Nandri, and Dhanyavad, which are in it's English and also Tamil and Hindi. And a quick note that, you know, we don't have to be multilingual teachers to be doing culturally sustaining work. What we need to be is curious and open to possibilities. And that's true for all of our work, I think, as primary teachers. But I'm just positioning this within a multiliterate space, and bringing in joy, you know, in very intentional and concrete ways. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks, Harini. I'm just going to put up my final slide, and Charmaine and I are going to close. Let me see if
Yeah,
I
I'm
can-
going to take a moment just to thank Leyton. Gosh, energy, passion, compassion, all the things all at once in one happy package. So we really just thank you for this opportunity and for the partnership with UBC, for this deep learning and such an important story today on identity. And we always talk about children bringing their whole selves to school, and it's so easy to say, and these stories just exemplify what that looks like and feels like. So thank you so much. What a wonderful opportunity for all of us, and to you, Leyton, again, thank you.
Thank you, Charmaine. Thank you to all of the partners who said we need to have something in primary this year, and how exciting that we did something in primary this year, people. I'm just going to pop up the master slide one more time. I just want to say, I hope that's shared. Somebody give me a thumbs up. Who can I see on my screen right now? Harini and there. Thanks, Stacy. Thanks, Charmaine. Hey, Roberta. People were connected from all of our times together. Thanks to all of our speakers this year for sharing their practice. For each one considered the question, what counts as primary literacy? And so very much the focus has been, what are all the ways that we can and need to be thinking about literacy and that we can nurture literacy? You'll notice that if I assume you got here because you're registered, unless you snuck on some other way, and then good for you, colleague. But there is a little thing that comes out in the next week or so that just offers feedback. We are super curious about what else we might explore in the future if we offered this series again next year. This really came from this series this year really came from this place of trying to attend to all the aspects of literacy and what they look like. And special thanks to Briana and Harini today for helping us think about the drawing and the writing aspects and how that works. I know we can only do so much in a two-part series this year, but I feel a call to oral language myself, but I don't want to tell you what to write on your sheets, everybody. But Harini did talk about the sea of talk, right? This idea that language develops, reading and writing develop through oral language. So I'm super curious to see or hear from y'all. You could tell me now, but I'll remember better if you fill out the questionnaire that comes, and you can say both what you appreciated about this year's series, but if we did something again next year, what are the things that we might attend to in terms of primary literacy? Thank you for letting the sun set in most of the places you are while we're going, though I see some sunshine still, some light for Roberta and Charmaine anyway, but it's looking a little dark there, Stacy. But I just want to thank you all. Christina, it's looking a little darker there too. Enjoy that, you know, the shade and the contours and the texture. But thank you for finding time to come to be part of this work, for honoring the work that's happening around the province, and also most importantly, for thinking about and nurturing our diverse learners in our classrooms, recognizing that they're not all at the same place at the same time, and that not only is that okay, but our goal is to move every child forward in literacy And to do so, we need to have some really rich and robust practices that teach foundational skills embedded in ways where kids can not just feel successful, but they can see themselves and communicate who they are. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful evening. And the recording should come out in the next week. Take care, everybody. Love you in a professional way.